You open your eyes in the morning, and for a few seconds everything feels normal until the weight crashes back down. That familiar feeling of being trapped in a life that no longer belongs to you, as if each day is just a mechanical repeat of the last. You go to work, go through the motions, plaster on a smile when you have to, but inside there's a silent scream nobody hears. It's like being in a movie where you're just an extra in your own existence, following a script someone wrote for you ages ago, back when you didn't even know you could question it. At night, lying in bed, thoughts come in like an uncontrollable tide. Is this it? Am I going to wake up 10 years from now and realize I wasted my only shot at living a life that truly matters? You've tried to change. You've devoured self-help books promising transformation in 30 days, watched motivational videos that pumped you up for a few hours, maybe even kicked off new habits that lasted weeks before crumbling. And then comes that devastating conclusion. Maybe the problem is you. Maybe you're just not strong enough, disciplined enough, brave enough to change your life. But what if I told you the problem was never you? What if the real reason you feel stuck isn't a lack of willpower, but the fact that you're carrying around things that were never yours to begin with? Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz and founded logotherapy, discovered something revolutionary as he observed who survived and who succumbed in the concentration camps. He realized the difference wasn't in physical strength, youth, or luck, but in the ability to let go of certain things and embrace others. And today, you're going to discover exactly the 5 things you need to let go of if you truly want to change your life. Not superficially, but deeply and lastingly. And the first thing you urgently need to let go of is the idea that you need to feel ready before you act. There's a deeply ingrained belief in our culture that change begins with a feeling, with an overwhelming surge of motivation that finally propels us out of our comfort zone. We expect to wake up one day feeling ready, confident, fearless, and then, and only then, will we begin the transformation we crave. Frankl observed something in the concentration camps that completely shattered this notion. He saw men who had every emotional reason to give up, who woke up every day without a shred of motivation, without hope, with no desire to go on. And yet they chose to get up, to work, to help other prisoners. Not because they felt ready or motivated, but because they understood a fundamental truth about human nature. We don't act because of how we feel, we act in spite of how we feel. The human freedom Frankl championed wasn't freedom from circumstances, because in Auschwitz, no one had freedom from circumstances. True freedom is the capacity to choose your attitude in the face of circumstances, to choose your actions regardless of your feelings. When you wait to feel ready to change careers, to end that toxic relationship, to start that project that's been rattling around in your head for years, you are handing over the control of your life to something entirely unstable and unpredictable, your emotions. And here's the liberating paradox Frankl taught. The more you act in spite of fear, the less fear you feel. The more you act without motivation, the more motivation appears. Action doesn't follow feeling. Feeling follows action. There's a fascinating case study Frankl recounts in his books about a medical student who suffered from paralyzing anxiety before exams. He would wait for the day he'd finally feel confident and calm enough to take the tests. Frankl employed a technique called paradoxical intention and instructed the student that instead of waiting for calm, he should go take the exam precisely when he was feeling anxious, not in spite of the anxiety, but with the anxiety. The result was transformative. By stopping his fight against the feeling and acting anyway, the student discovered his feelings didn't have the power he believed they did. You're probably postponing crucial changes in your life, waiting for that moment when you'll feel safe, prepared, without doubt. Let me tell you a painful but freeing secret. That moment will never come. Ever. The person you will be when you finally change your life isn't the person who felt ready to change. It's the person who changed in spite of not feeling ready. Think about every big change you've ever made in your life, every single one. Can you recall a single instance where you felt 100% ready and confident before you started? Probably not. You were scared when you moved to a new city, when you started that new job, when you entered that relationship, and you did it anyway. So why are you waiting now for a certainty you've never had before? This is the first thing to let go of, the need to feel ready. Let go of that idea now and start taking action in the direction you know you need to go, even if your hands are shaking, even if your heart is pounding, even if you're taking tiny steps, because the life you want isn't on the other side of confidence, it's on the other side of action. The second thing you need to let go of if you want to change your life is the pursuit of happiness as your primary goal. This might sound completely contradictory, even unsettling. After all, isn't happiness what we're all chasing? Isn't it to be happy that we want to change our lives? Viktor Frankl made a revolutionary discovery that goes against the entire modern self-help industry. Happiness can't be pursued. It can only be achieved as a byproduct of pursuing something larger than yourself. He called this self-transcendence, the human capacity to point towards something beyond oneself. In the concentration camps, Frankl observed that the prisoners who obsessively focused on their own happiness, their own comfort, their own survival, were precisely the ones who suffered most psychologically and gave up most frequently. On the other hand, those who found a purpose that transcended their own situation, like helping other prisoners, preserving human dignity, or simply surviving to tell the truth to the world, were able to endure unimaginable suffering with a disconcerting inner strength. Contemporary culture peddles a dangerous lie, that you deserve to be happy, that happiness is a right, that if you're not happy, something is fundamentally wrong. This obsession with happiness creates what Frankl called an existential vacuum, a feeling that despite having everything that should make you happy, you still feel like something essential is missing. And do you know what's missing? Meaning, responsibility, purpose. When you wake up every day asking, "Am I happy?" you become an obsessive inspector of your own emotional life, always measuring, always evaluating, always disappointed, because happiness is by its nature fleeting and unstable. But when you wake up asking, "What is life asking of me today?" you completely shift the focus. You stop being a consumer of experiences, seeking pleasure, and become a creator of meaning, responding to demands. Frankl tells the story of an elderly patient who was deeply depressed after his wife's death. When Frankl asked what would have happened if he had died first, the man replied that his wife would have suffered terribly. Frankl then pointed out, "You see, by surviving her, you spared your wife that suffering. Now you are paying the price for having loved her, but she was spared." The man's suffering immediately gained meaning, and with meaning, he was able to bear the pain in a completely different way. He didn't become happy, but he found peace in knowing his suffering had a purpose. The great irony, Frankl taught, is that the more you chase happiness, the less you find it. But the more you chase meaning, the more happiness appears as a natural byproduct. Think about the most significant experiences in your life. How many of them were comfortable and easy? Probably very few. The moments that defined you most were likely difficult, challenging, even painful, but they were rich with meaning. Raising a child isn't a constantly happy experience, but it's profoundly meaningful. Building a career isn't pure pleasure, but when it has purpose, it sustains you through the difficulties. Overcoming addiction is painful, but the person you become in the process is incomparably more valuable than the temporary pleasure the addiction offered. So stop asking, "Will this make me happy?" and start asking, "Does this have meaning? Does this make me who I want to be? Does this contribute to something bigger than my own comfort?" When you abandon happiness as a goal and embrace meaning as your compass, you discover a source of strength that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You become capable of facing immense difficulties and emerging not broken, but transformed. This is the second thing to let go of, the idea that your life should revolve around your happiness. Your life should revolve around what only you can contribute to the world, the purpose only you can fulfill, the responsibility that has your name written all over it. And now, I want to pause and really talk to you. I know many of you watching this video are carrying a silent weight that nobody around you seems to understand. You've probably heard 1,000 times that you should change, that you should be more motivated, happier, more productive, but these pressures only amplify the feeling of inadequacy. So tell me here in the comments, have you ever felt like you're living on autopilot, doing everything you're supposed to do, but without really feeling alive? If so, simply write, "I'm living on autopilot." That's all. Your experience matters. And by sharing it here, you're helping countless others who feel exactly the same way realize they're not alone. Often it's liberating just to see that others are going through the same thing and are on this same journey in search of a more authentic and meaningful life. When you share, you not only validate your own experience, but show dozens of others that they're not alone in this quest. Let's create a community of courage and honesty here. The third thing you need to let go of if you want to change your life is the belief that you need to completely understand yourself before you can change. There's a widely held idea, heavily influenced by Freudian psychoanalysis, that to change you first need to conduct a deep archaeological dig into your psyche, unearthing childhood traumas, understanding every reason why you are the way you are and meticulously mapping out your emotional wounds. Frankl, a contemporary and later critic of many Freudian ideas, proposed something radically different. He argued that an excessive focus on self-understanding can become a sophisticated form of self-obsession that actually paralyzes change instead of facilitating it. In the concentration camps, there was no luxury of years of therapy to dissect why you reacted a certain way to trauma. Brutal reality demanded immediate action, constant choices, moment-to-moment responsibility. And Frankl observed that many prisoners who were previously considered neurotic or psychologically fragile demonstrated extraordinary strength when they stopped analyzing themselves and started focusing on something larger than themselves. One of the most powerful concepts in logotherapy is de-reflection, which literally means stopping the obsessive reflection on yourself and redirecting your attention to the world, to other people, to meaningful tasks. Frankl applied this especially to cases of sexual neuroses and insomnia. Patients who became fixated on analyzing why they couldn't sleep or why they had certain sexual difficulties only got worse the more they thought about it. The solution wasn't more self-analysis, but less. It was a complete redirection of focus. You've probably experienced this yourself. How many times have you been paralyzed trying to figure out why you procrastinate, why you have social anxiety, why you sabotage relationships? And the more you analyze, the more complex everything becomes. The more reasons you find, the more justifications pop up, and the less you actually change. This doesn't mean self-knowledge has no value. It means there's a point where self-analysis becomes self-sabotage, disguised as self-awareness. Frankl tells of a patient who suffered from severe social phobia and had spent years in psychoanalysis exploring the roots of this phobia in her relationship with her parents. She perfectly understood why she was afraid of other people, could trace the entire psychological genealogy of the problem, yet remained completely socially paralyzed. Frankl radically shifted the approach. Instead of asking, "Why are you afraid?" he asked, "What do you want to overcome this fear for? What would you do if you didn't have this fear?" When she was able to articulate a purpose that transcended the fear itself, like working with children suffering from neglect, something shifted. The focus moved from the problem to the meaning. And with that change in focus, she began to act despite the fear, not because she understood its causes, but because she had something more important to do than analyze her limitations. The inconvenient truth is that you can spend your entire life understanding why you are the way you are and die without ever having changed. Understanding isn't transformation. Insight isn't action. You don't need to wait to understand all your dysfunctional patterns before you start living differently. In fact, you'll often only truly understand who you are after you start acting in new ways. Action creates self-knowledge, not the other way around. Think about how many hours you've already spent ruminating on your flaws, analyzing your mistakes, dissecting your insecurities. Now imagine if you had used half that time acting towards something that matters to you. Where would you be? Modern therapeutic culture sometimes creates what Frankl called hyper-reflection, an excessive and pathological focus on oneself that reinforces the very problems you're trying to solve. The more you focus on your anxiety, the more anxious you become. The more you analyze your procrastination, the more you procrastinate. The more you try to force happiness, the more unhappy you become. This is the third thing to let go of. The idea that you need to understand yourself completely before you can change. You don't need to wait for total clarity, perfect self-knowledge, or the resolution of all your traumas. You need to find something worth doing, despite your current limitations, something that pulls you out of the vicious cycle of self-obsession and into the world, serving, creating, contributing. Because it's by acting in the world that you truly discover who you are, not by staying trapped in your own head trying to decode yourself. The fourth thing you need to let go of if you truly want to change your life is the reliance on external conditions to start living. How many times have you said or thought something like, "When I have more money, then I'll do what really matters. When I lose weight, then I'll start living for real. When I find the right relationship, then I'll be happy. When I get that job, then I'll feel fulfilled." This is one of the cruelest traps of human existence, the illusion that true life is always in the future, conditioned on circumstances that haven't happened yet. Frankl completely demolished this illusion with a simple observation. If people in Auschwitz, literally hell on earth, could find meaning and exercise inner freedom, then surely people with infinitely more resources and external freedom can too. The issue was never about having perfect conditions. The issue was always about the attitude you choose in the face of the conditions you have. Frankl developed the concept of freedom of the will, not as freedom from circumstances, but as freedom despite circumstances. Even when everything is taken from you, possessions, family, health, physical dignity, the last of human freedoms remains, choosing how you will respond to what is happening. In the camps, some prisoners became animals in the fight for survival. Others became saints, sharing their last crust of bread. The circumstances were identical. What determined the difference was each person's inner choice. Now think about your own life. You likely have guaranteed food, a place to sleep, access to knowledge through the internet, freedom to move, choose, create. And yet you feel stuck waiting for something external to change so you can finally live. See the painful irony of that? Frankl recounts a fascinating case of a patient who claimed he couldn't be happy because he had a physical defect in his nose. He was convinced that if he had plastic surgery, all his problems would be solved, and he would finally be happy and confident. Frankl didn't try to convince him that the nose didn't matter. Instead, he asked, "Let's assume you have the surgery and get a perfect nose. What would you do with your life then?" The patient fell silent. He had never thought about it. His entire existence was focused on the external condition that needed changing, but he had no idea what he would do next. This revealed the truth. The nose wasn't the real problem. It was just a convenient excuse to avoid the responsibility of living. How many of your excuses function exactly like that? You're waiting to lose 10 pounds, but if you lost it today, what would you actually do differently? You're waiting to have more money, but if you won the lottery tomorrow, what truly significant change would you make? Often, the external conditions we think need to change are just sophisticated excuses to avoid the weight of freedom, the responsibility of choosing, the fear of discovering that even with perfect conditions, we would still have to face the fundamental question, what am I living for? Frankl taught that the question isn't, what do I expect from life? But, what does life expect from me? When you flip the question, you realize that life is making demands on you now, with the conditions you have now, not with the conditions you wish you had. There is a specific task only you can accomplish, a contribution that has your name on it, a responsibility that cannot be delegated, and that task isn't waiting for you to have the perfect body, the full bank account, the ideal relationship. It's waiting for you now, imperfect, scared, limited, but willing. One of logotherapy's most liberating insights is that meaning can be found in any circumstance, not just despite bad circumstances, but through them. The unemployed person can find meaning in how they use that time. The sick person can find meaning in the dignity with which they face their illness. The lonely person can transform solitude into creative solitude. No situation is completely devoid of possibilities for meaning, only people who have given up looking. This is the fourth thing to let go of, the belief that you need to wait for perfect conditions to start truly living. Stop postponing your existence until everything magically aligns. Start now, where you are, with what you have. Because the life you want isn't waiting for you on the other side of ideal conditions. It's waiting for you on the other side of a decision. The decision to take total responsibility for your existence, regardless of the circumstances. The fifth and final thing you need to let go of if you want to change your life is perhaps the hardest of all. Identifying with your story of suffering as your central identity. This will touch on something deep and possibly painful, so pay attention. Many people build their entire identity around what they've been through. Trauma becomes not just something that happened to them, but who they are. I'm a traumatized person. I'm an abuse survivor. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. Notice how these statements aren't describing temporary experiences, but permanent identities. Frankl fully recognized the reality and seriousness of human suffering. He lived through horrors most of us could never imagine. But he made a crucial distinction between suffering and defining yourself by your suffering. He observed that some concentration camp survivors carried their experiences like scars that testified to strength and transformation, while others carried the same experiences like open wounds that became the center of their entire existence. The difference didn't minimize the trauma, but it completely determined what the person did with it. There's a dangerous seduction in identifying with your suffering. First, because it offers a ready-made explanation for all your problems. If you're fundamentally a traumatized person, then you don't have to take full responsibility for your choices. Your trauma explains and justifies everything. Second, because our culture often values and rewards narratives of victimization. There's attention, compassion, even a certain status in being seen as someone who's been through a lot. Third, because letting go of this identity means confronting a terrifying question. If I'm not my story of suffering, then who am I? Frankl treated countless patients trapped in this predicament. One patient in particular had suffered childhood abuse and had built her entire adult life around this narrative. Every relationship that failed, every opportunity she missed, every moment of unhappiness was explained and justified by her childhood trauma. She was, without realizing it, using her genuinely painful past as an excuse not to live fully in the present. Frankl's approach wasn't to deny or minimize the trauma, it was to ask, given that this happened and it can't be changed, what are you going to do now? How will you transform this suffering into something that contributes to your life instead of defining it? The patient resisted intensely at first. It seemed cruel to force her to abandon the only thing that explained her pain. But gradually she began to understand. As long as she defined herself solely by her trauma, she would be eternally bound to it. Transformation required adopting a new identity, not as someone who suffered, but as someone who transformed suffering into wisdom, pain into compassion, trauma into strength. Here's the truth that hurts. Your trauma is real, your suffering is valid, your pain deserves to be acknowledged. But if you want to change your life, you cannot make your trauma your permanent identity. You need to be able to say not I am traumatized, but I have been through trauma and I choose what to do with it. The difference seems subtle, but it's revolutionary. One imprisons you in the past, the other frees you for the future. Frankl used the phrase tragic triad to describe the inevitable dimensions of human existence: suffering, guilt, and death. No one escapes these three realities, but he argued that precisely because they are inevitable, our task is not to avoid them but to transform them. Suffering can be transformed into achievement. Guilt can become the foundation for change. Even the awareness of death can enrich life rather than poison it. Many people today have what Frankl would call a neugenic neurosis, not caused by psychological or biological problems, but by a void of meaning. And one of the most common forms of this neurosis is a fixation on past traumas as a substitute for present meaning. While you're endlessly dissecting what hurt you, you don't have to face the more daunting question: what are you going to create with your life? This doesn't mean you should ignore or repress your suffering. It means you must process it, integrate it, and then transcend it towards something greater. Your traumas can inform who you are, but they cannot define who you will become. This is the fifth thing to let go of: the identity built primarily around your suffering. You are infinitely more than the worst thing that happened to you. You have the specifically human capacity to take even the most painful experiences and transform them into meaning, into contribution, into growth. But this requires brutal courage, the courage to let go of the victim narrative, not because it isn't true, but because it no longer serves you. If these ideas are resonating deeply with you, if you feel you've finally found someone who understands this quest for genuine meaning, beyond superficial fixes, subscribe to this channel. Here we explore the thought of Frankl and other humanist philosophers weekly, offering real answers to the existential emptiness so many of us carry in silence. You don't have to walk alone on this journey of self-discovery and transformation. This is a safe space to question everything, to explore the deepest dimensions of human existence, to find practical logotherapy-based tools that truly work because they've been tested in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Hit that subscribe button and become part of this community of people brave enough to question, to seek, and to grow. Because true change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when you surround yourself with ideas and people who elevate your understanding of what it means to be human. So, let's quickly recap these 5 things you need to let go of if you really want to change your life. First, the illusion that you need to feel ready before you act. Transformation never waits for you to feel confident. It demands that you act despite the fear. Second, the pursuit of happiness as your primary goal. Happiness is a byproduct of living with purpose, not a destination you arrive at. Third, the belief that you need to understand yourself completely before you can change. Action creates self-awareness, not the other way around. Fourth, the dependence on perfect external conditions to start living. Life is making demands on you right now, with the circumstances you have right now. And fifth, identifying with your story of suffering as your core identity. You are infinitely more than the worst thing that has happened to you. But here's what I want you to understand above all else. Letting go of these 5 things isn't an instantaneous or linear process. You'll have days when you slip back into waiting to feel ready, moments when you catch yourself chasing happiness instead of purpose, periods when you fall back into the trap of overanalyzing yourself. That's normal. That's human. The difference now is that you know. You have awareness, and awareness is the first step toward genuine choice. Viktor Frankl spent years in concentration camps where everything was taken from him: his family, his profession, his manuscripts, his physical freedom. But no one could take away his ability to choose how to respond to it, and it was precisely in that extreme situation that he developed the ideas that have helped millions of people worldwide find meaning in their own lives. If he could find meaning and inner freedom in Auschwitz, surely you can find it in the infinitely more favorable circumstances you live in. The question that remains is this: will you keep waiting for something external to change so you can finally live? Or will you take radical responsibility that your life, exactly as it is right now, is already calling you to something greater? Every moment you postpone real change is a moment you're saying yes to the life you claim you don't want. And every moment you act, even imperfectly, even with fear, even without guarantees, is a moment you're exercising the most fundamental freedom there is. The freedom to become who you can be. Hit that like button on this video if it helped you see your situation differently. Share in the comments which of these 5 things impacts you the most, which one you need to let go of most urgently. And most importantly, don't let this video be just another piece of motivational content that fires you up for a few hours and then gets forgotten. Choose one concrete action you will take today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but today. That represents a step toward the life you truly want to live. It can be small, it can be uncomfortable, but it needs to be real. Because in the end, life doesn't ask you what you know, or what you understand, or how you feel. Life asks you what you do. And it's through what you do, especially when it's hard, that you discover who you truly are and who you can become.